Hello and welcome to another Hammock Talk with Logan. So today I wanted to talk about Nirvana, uh, not the band, the Buddhist concept, uh, and also the Hindu concept. Now, in Buddhism, there's two different versions of Nirvana. One is in the Mahayana version, it's kind of like this semi-transient nirvana, and I'm not really gonna talk about that version at this time. I'm gonna talk about the parinirvana, or the full nirvana, the kind that they talk about in Hinduism and also in Theravada Buddhism. So it's in summary, I see it as really kind of an absolute death, as absolute as is possible, given that information theory, you can't destroy information. So the idea is after you disincarnate or after you die, then you go to the soul world. And if you have nothing at all left to do, and or you're like a super broken soul or something like that, where you just can't make any progress and you just don't want to live anymore, then there is the option of joining a soul generating cluster. Uh, and so, well, because you can't really destroy a soul, but you can join a soul generating cluster. And there, what happens is basically a soul joins this cluster. And to visualize it, you can imagine it as like a big ball of fire or a star, but it's not really hot per se or anything. Um, so, anyways, so the person can join this ball, this soul generating cluster, and then the individual parts, their memories and stuff, they all get kind of like pulled apart. They're various different information fragments, and it all gets kind of redistributed throughout the soul generating cluster. So they lose all identity of who they are or anything like that. But some of the memories may remain intact, but they will no longer kind of be associated together. It will no longer be like a person. They will no longer exist as an individual entity. They will have joined the soul generating cluster. And out of this soul generating cluster, eventually some of these different souls will have some mashups. And then, just like how on our star, you have solar flares. So in a solar generating cluster, when there's a solar flare, what pops out is a new soul. And some of these are like too weak to incarnate, or they're just gonna stick around in the soul world forever, or they might not be strong enough for Earth, so they might incarnate on an easier planet or something like that. And some of them might incarnate on Earth, or even more difficult planets. So who knows? And yeah, that's basically how it goes. Now, one of the kind of confusions I found with Nirvana is that some people have this, you know, uh, they think, oh, I've achieved Nirvana in this lifetime because I have no desires. But there's a catch, and that catch is that you've only incarnated with a fraction of your soul, and that sometimes even a bigger fraction, like say you've incarnated with between 80 and 30% of your soul, depending on how advanced your soul is and how much you can stuff into one of these little bodies. Uh, and so when you rejoin your higher self, you might think, oh, I've done everything I've come to do. And then when you rejoin your higher self, you're like, hey, oh, you know what? There's still like this 80% more stuff that I can do to help the world, and many more ways, many more things I want to learn. And then it's like, hey, you know what? Let's do another incarnation. So and so then you're back in samsara. Now there is another way. There's actually at least two other ways of getting out of samsara. One is the method of just spiritual advancement to the point where um, you no longer benefit from incarnating. Just because, these bodies, they're pretty simple, and so are our worlds, especially considering that, especially in this galaxy, almost everything is just all this DNA-based life forms. There's a limit. There's a limit to the amount you can learn while incarnated in these kinds of bodies. That's one of the reasons I'm working on Lurk's liberated robot civilization, because with robot civilization there will be more learning opportunities, and so more of these kind of advanced souls will be able to gain learning, and so we'll be able to continue incarnating uh, if they so wish. And so someone can that has, say, learned what they wanted to learn, they can stay in the soul world and help others as in the form of a spirit guide. So if you've been kind of persistent enough, or lucky enough, or whatever, to have a good spirit guide connection, then well, they're that kind of person. And now I'm not just pulling this out from my personal experience. There's the Newton Institute, which has been doing thousands of in-between life regressions on people that have gathered much of this in-between life information, like, say, the soul generating clusters and the spirit guides and what happens in between lives. So you can definitely check those books out by I think it was David Newton, or was it Michael Newton? Anyways, one of those. Journey of Souls, that kind of stuff, and Destiny of Souls. Um, yeah. Oh, and there was another method, and the other method is the Ascension Method. Now, it doesn't really end samsara per se, but it does, for instance, allow you to have kind of a better incarnation, you could say. So, for instance, if you are following the generous path, you can check some of my videos back on the 3 paths. Then you will be eligible to incarnate on a generous planet. And generous planets usually have pretty good lives, where life is there's still lots of learning, but there's not as much kind of suffering going on, because people have their basic needs met, and everybody that got there because they were giving and generous people who donate, or not necessarily donate, but are of service to others 51% or more of the time. 51%, of their effort. And so some people might call this a heaven kind of realm, but really, like, there's lots of these kinds of planets, and actually they're usually the majority of the time, uh, millions of years people can spend on that kind of planet. And then but and say like that would be like fourth density. And fourth density, often the body form kind of changes, shifts, and it's more like, you know, how you might know gray aliens, also Arcturians. So gray aliens are often associated with the selfish planets here because, you know, the gray aliens that abduct people and give bad experiences, those are often from the selfish planets. But you know, that's more of a body form, you know. Like the Arcturians, they also look quite similar to the Greys, but you know, they're from a generous planet. It's just like kind of something that happens to people if they live underground a lot or if they do lots of space travel. You know, it's just, it makes sense if you're, you know, hatching people and stuff like that, if they go to that gray body form. And that's fourth density. And so, like, after, you know, some millions of years of going through that and figuring everything out, then there's fifth density, where it's kind of like the shapeshifter uh, archetype, you could say. Well, they're basically like balls of light, really, but incarnated balls of light. So in the soul world, we're balls of light, but there's like the fifth density bodies. They're slightly different. They're not really ball lightning per se, but in fifth density, you're basically a ball of light, and you can do various things, especially on your, you know, planet or whatnot, and you know, lives tens of thousands of years, no problem, and per incarnation, that is. Um, and there's lots of shapeshifting, as I said. Possible if you're the traveler kind of tourism type, then you could go to different worlds, you know, and you can pretend to be one of the locals for a bit, see how they live, you know, then go to another world, you know, shapeshift to be like them, that kind of stuff. Um, and then there's sixth density. It's like even less kind of body formish, and end up hanging out with you guys on third density. Well, not always, you know, but it's nice. And the rain, you know, and snow, and anyway. So Nirvana. Uh, so kind of the point is that I like the Mahayana path of the Bodhisattva, where that's not really a goal. Like, or there's that pseudo maybe Nirvana. That's not really Nirvana. It's not an actual endless death like the real Nirvana is. Yeah, so that's the summary. Nirvana is an endless death where your identity gets completely decimated, or, you know, and then parts of yourself give birth to new souls eventually. Anyway, so I hope you know a little bit more about Nirvana and a little bit more about some of the alternatives to Nirvana. Uh, Thank you. Namaste.